Roxana. It's great to have you. Thanks again for joining.
Thank you so much for the invite. Great to be here.
Thank you. Could you briefly introduce yourself and tell us about your journey?
Yes, sure. So I am Roxana Mohammadian-Molina. I am former investment banker, started my career in investment banking, commodities, really doing commodities research and strategy and so on. And then I moved out of the corporate world about 10 years ago, started investing at the intersection of finance, technology, and real estate. So a lot of private credit platforms and non-bank lenders and so on, which is a journey that, I have done over the past 10 years and also helping companies in the sector grow and scale. I recently finished a book in real estate private credit for Wiley, the publisher Wiley. The title is Beyond Bank, The Rise of Private Credit in Real Estate, which will be published on the 1st of October. So it's a very exciting time. So I invest in businesses and I help founders and startups grow and scale.
Great background. Thank you. And many startups dream of expanding internationally, but often struggle with choosing the right markets. What are the most common mistakes made when entering new markets, and how can they avoid?
Well, I would say that, maybe the biggest mistake is assuming that what worked in one country or in one market will automatically, work in another market. I think this is something that is very common, that I see many founders, going through this. I would say that expansion isn't simply, just replicating a model that worked in one place in another place. It's not about translating, a website or opening an office. It's obviously a lot more than that. It's about understanding the local customer, local regulation, the local culture, and the distribution channel. So I think this is very, very important, and it applies really to any market that you want to expand to. Some of the mistakes that I see would be insufficient market validation. Founders that, often they expand because the market is attractive, because everyone is talking about it, because they heard about it, but without real evidence of customer demand into that market. Understanding the regulation is also another key mistake that I see very often, especially if we are in heavily regulated sectors such as finance, fintech, or healthcare, and so on. So it's very important to understand the local regulation. I think another key one would be when I see people trying to build everything themselves. Again, this is something that often goes wrong, because the fastest route into a new market is often through a strong local partnership, instead of just starting from scratch. And then talent, hiring too quickly before achieving a market product fit. I think the expansion should be phased and kind of milestone driven, if you like. So yeah, those would be the things that I often see going wrong for founders.
Very useful tips, thank you. And you are deeply involved in both Europe and Gulf region. What opportunities do you currently see for startups looking to expand into Saudi Arabia and the wider Gulf region?
Well, yes, as you mentioned, in my role as the Vice Chair of the Saudi British Joint Business Council, I am very much involved in the region, and I see a lot of, investors and founders interested. Obviously, we are witnessing, one of the most significant economic transformations in the region, Saudi Arabia with the Vision 2030. It used to be a huge energy a giant, but I think it no longer is an energy story. It's becoming an innovation story, a technology, an investment story. Areas that are very strong, that are having a strong momentum, would be AI, obviously, fintech and digital financial services, climate tech, clean tech, sustainability, prop tech and smart cities. We have all heard about, the large kind of NEOM and all of those. Health tech, education as well, ed tech. So a lot of traditional sectors with added technology. So, health with tech, health tech, education tech, logistics, supply chain. Obviously, it is aiming to become a regional hub for logistics, and then, tourism, obviously, and hospitality and technology. So I think those are key sectors, and those are all the sectors that we see as being the, very, very important in the Vision 2030, if you read the Vision 2030 documents. And so within those sectors, we have seen a lot of interest of entrepreneurs who are doing innovation in those sectors, being interested in expanding into the GCC. Again, I would go back to your first question, in terms of the mistakes that you often do when you expand into a new market. And just be aware of those mistakes.
Thank you. As an investor, what are the 3 qualities that make a startup stand out beyond having a great product or technology?
Well, I think without wanting to sound like a cliche, technology is really rarely the deciding factor for me or for the people that, I speak to. Really is about the people. It is investors back people. And I think this sounds like a cliche, but it's the reality. So I think that for me, would be the 3 points would be exceptional founders, people, really you're backing the people. So when you speak to the person and when you meet them, you're asking in your mind, can they execute their vision? Do they have a vision? Can they execute their vision? Can they attract talent? Can they attract and keep talent? Can they adapt to things when the things go wrong or they don't go according to plan? Because always you will have things that go wrong and don't go according to plan. So the question that you will be asking, can this person continue executing when things don't go according to plan? So the second would be, I would say, the humility and the coachability. Obviously, we are looking for exceptional founders, but even the best founders, even though they are confident and they have a conviction, but they are also humble enough to change their mind and to listen to the advice. I think this is very important. So having that combination of, yes, you have a strong vision and yes, you know where you want to be, but at the same time be humble to accept advice and kind of change course when it needs to change course. And the third one would be commercial execution, because it's great to have a vision, it's great to have a plan, but then when I see things going wrong most of the time is in the execution. So looking for the evidence that they know how customers are acquired, they know they retained and how customers are retained, they know how to monetize, and it's not just about having an exciting product, it's about really being able to go to market, acquire the customers, retain them, and so on. So I think that overall, great technology opens the doors, but it's really strong execution that build the company.
Thank you. Through your work with women in finance, what change are you seeing and what advice would you give to female founders taking investment?
I think that for sure we are seeing, genuine progress. This is the first point, and I think it's very good, very important. I think that we are seeing more confidence. We are seeing more dedicated funds supporting women-led businesses, which is really great. And we are seeing a stronger ecosystem for female founders more than a few years ago. So I think this is real progress. We are seeing more confidence, I think, because we are seeing more role models coming through the ranks. We are just having, more female founders that are able to identify with previous female founders that have succeeded. And so they are, being used as role models. So that is really, there's still a long journey, there's still a lot of work to be done. But I think that, the progress is that we are seeing more dedicated funds and more opportunities. But I think, advice that I would have for founders would be build the relationships before you need the capital, because a lot of people, only when you are going for a funding round and you really have an open round, then you start to build those relationships. But I think that it's too late. You really need to start building the relationships way before that, before you need the capital, because at the end of the day, investors, they fund, founders that they know is a personal relationship, really, a lot of the times. So another advice would be to tell a commercial story, so passion matters. You need to have investors that, they ultimately invest in execution, as we discussed, but at the same time, there needs to be a really interesting story, a vision, a passion story. Yeah, so those would be my advice.
Thank you. And if a founder is considering expanding to Switzerland, what should they know before entering the market? This was our last question.
Well, I must say that, I only recently moved to Switzerland, so I haven't, been here for a very long time. I was for kind of nearly 20 years in the UK before. So my advice would be, with a pinch of salt, because I'm still in the process of learning the market myself. But the general advice would be, as we said before, really to understand the market. And as going back to your first question, not just, expand because what you hear, or really do a lot of research in understanding the market and understanding whether there is a market fit for your products. Obviously, it is a smaller market than many of the other markets that we know, just because the population is smaller than many of the other markets. I think from what I hear, because we have very strong universities, tech universities, the university and innovation ecosystem is very, very strong. And you have a lot of talent in specific cities around the university. So I think that's good. What I hear from, entrepreneurs is that acquiring talent tends to be easier than in some other places because you have these areas around the universities. But it's really kind of, learning, understanding the market and to see whether it's really a market fit for your product.
Thank you so much, Roxana. It was a very insightful conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you again.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.